Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this MAPS webinar, where we're going to be talking about recent updates to MAPS. We'll just allow a couple of minutes for everybody to join, but welcome and thank you for being here with us today. While we wait for people to come in, I will just say that, and I'll repeat this again later, we're going to be recording this webinar and we will be sharing the recording afterwards. So if you have any colleagues or people in your network who are not able to join us today, then please do share the webinar with them afterwards. And we are hoping, of course, to get the news out to as many people as possible. And for that, we're also very happy that a lot of you have signed up and registered to be here today. And we are very excited to show you and talk about these recent changes. And for all of you who are just joining right now, welcome to this webinar, this MAPS webinar, where we will be talking about recent updates to the framework. We will be recording the webinar and it will be available after today's session on our website, where you can share it amongst colleagues and amongst your network. We'll just be allowing one more minute for people to join, and then we will get started. While that is ongoing, I can also say that we are, of course, happy to answer any questions that you may have. This is part of the motivation for today's session. So please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your questions in writing, and then we will answer as many of them as we can, either in the Q&A function, so in writing, or when we get to the end of the presentation, we will answer some of them live to make sure that everything is explained properly. So please do submit any question on these updates that you might have using the Q&A function in the Zoom menu for this. And with that, we will get started on the webinar. So once again, a warm welcome to all of you. Good afternoon, morning, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are right now. We are very excited to welcome you to today's webinar to talk about recent updates to the MAPS framework. And today I will be taking you through what has been updated and some details on the individual things. And you will be able to ask questions that you have for the updates using the Q&A function. The webinar is being recorded so that you can share it with colleagues after the session who are not able to attend for some reason today's webinar. So let's get into it. I want to start by just outlining what we have been updating in this recent launch. And some of you might already have seen it on our new website, but what we have updated is the overall framework structure, which is to say the way the whole MAPS is organized. We have updated the individual assessment methodologies. So with that, I mean the specific documents for MAPS main, for the supplementary module. Those are the documents that are detailing the individual indicators, sub-indicators, and so on. They have been slightly updated. We have made some updates to the analytical approach. We have revised the user guide and created a brand new version of this. And we have updated all templates according to those changes in the other elements. And today I will be going through each of these 5 points to explain to you in a little bit more detail about what has been updated concerning that particular topic. By popular demand, we have also created a document with more details on the updates that have been made. So we're calling them release notes, and you will find them on our website along with an infographic that gives a quick visual overview of what has changed at the quite high level. At the end of this presentation, you will find a QR code that links directly to the methodology page where you can find all the new stuff, including these release notes and that infographic. But just to say that today's webinar, I will be going through all of these topics, and you will be able to find the details in the release notes and, of course, in those individual documents, the assessment methodologies, the templates, and the user guide. So the background for these updates is that we have been in consultations with that wide variety of stakeholders who is involved in MAPS assessments. So that is to say assessors, it is the institutions who are leading assessments, it is the MAPS steering committee, which also includes a representative from the MAPS countries, i.e. the countries where MAPS assessments has been carried out. And it is the MAPS Standing Technical Advisory Group. So this is the group from which the ATAGs for all assessments are composed. So all of these stakeholders we have been in consultation with to get input on the framework, how it's used, things that may be more complicated. And based on these consultations, plus, of course, lessons learned from all the assessments that have been carried out and published, including pilots of supplementary modules. We have taken these messages and transformed them into the updates to the framework and to the methodologies that you will see that we have just launched and that we have been talking about today. So with that in mind, I will be going on and talking about the specific updates that we have been doing. As a preliminary remark, I think it's important to just say that these updates we have made, although we have made them to various places, as you saw before, the overall framework structure, the user guide, and so on, it is not a revision of the methodology. So the structure and the intention of the methodology remains the same. The indicators, the sub-indicators are the same. What we're talking about here are updates that are supposed to make the framework easier to use, a little bit more flexible to use, and that will hopefully deliver better assessments that are also quicker in terms of the time it takes from start until publication. So we are not talking about a major overhaul of the methodology itself. All of that remains the same. We're talking about a further streamlining that should allow for better use of that framework. So with that preliminary remark, let's get into more details of what has changed. So first of all, we have changed the overall structure of the MAPS framework. So before, the framework consisted of a main methodology, that was also known as core MAPS, and a series of supplementary modules. We still have that structure. However, now we have MAPS main or core MAPS, and then we have 4 supplementary modules: sustainable public procurement, e-procurement, professionalization, and public-private partnerships and concessions. all of these elements, so MAPS main and each of the 4 modules, they can be used independently of each other. So this is an important thing that was already in place for some modules, but which is now for all modules, that you can use the main methodology, or you can use the modules, you can use them together, you can use one first, then another, as appropriate for the context in which you're carrying out an assessment. It will be up to, as always, lead institutions and countries to decide what is appropriate for their context. But from the point of view of the methodology, the main methodology and each of the modules can now be used independently. Previously, we had 2 additional modules for assessments at the sector level and the entity level. We have now changed this so that both MAPS main, the main methodology, and each of the 4 modules can be scoped at any level of government that you see here in the reverse pyramid on the slide. So from supranational all the way down to the entity level, which means that the previous modules on sector level assessment and entity level assessment has now been absorbed into the full methodology, as it were, where you can apply the MAPS main methodology, or if you want a specific topical look, you can also apply one of the modules and scope them to the level that is appropriate for the context that you want to be assessing. So just to run through quickly each of these levels, at the supranational level, that could be an association of countries. The important part there is that this supranational entity or association must, of course, have a procurement system that can actually be assessed. And this is something that goes through all the levels. It's important to remember that we are assessing a procurement system, so there must be something, a specific system that is specific to that level of government that we want to assess. So for the national level, obviously, we're talking about countries, jurisdictions. For the subnational level, we are most often talking about states, so entities within a country or regions within a country that have sufficient legal independence so that their system of procurement can be considered different from the national level. And then we have the sector and entity levels. So procurement within a specific sector, whether it is health or public works or something else. And at the entity level, some entity of government within the country. It can be a particular entity that has certain strategic value for the country or a certain size in terms of the procurement spent. Again, as always, it is up to the lead institution and the authorities involved to decide which level is appropriate for the circumstances that you want to assess. But just to recap, the news here is that we now have MAPS main plus 4 supplementary modules. Each can be used independently and each can be scoped at any level of government from the supranational all the way down to the entity level. So what this means is that we have this overall framework consisting of MAPS main and the 4 modules. And then we have some support materials that apply to all of this. So the user guide, all other guidance on our website, and the concept note template applies to both MAPS main and each of the 4 supplementary modules. And then for MAPS main and for each specific module, there is what we call the module methodology. So the specific documents describing the sub-indicators and assessment criteria and so on. And then there is the report template, and there is the indicator matrix, which is, of course, specific to each of the modules, given that the sub-indicators and so on vary between the modules. So we have some material that is shared for the whole framework, and then we have individual templates depending on what specific module you are applying. And just again to say that each of these elements of the methodology can be used independently. They can, of course, also still be used together. So you can use MAPS main with one of the modules, with more of the modules. You can use several of the modules together without a MAPS main, and so forth. The concept note template applies to all of it. As always, if you are applying several elements of the methodology, so let's say MAPS main plus a supplementary module, all of this must, of course, be described in the concept note. So as always, the concept note is the concept note for the entire assessment project, regardless of which part of it you are applying. This means that if you're applying some of the supplementary modules, all the information in the concept note template, the stakeholders, the information sources, and so on, must be described accordingly. So let's get into first the assessment methodology, what we have done here. So this is probably the most, let's say, minor part of the changes. What we have done to the assessment methodology is on the level of clarifications. So we have made a small number of corrections and clarifications to assessment criteria and sub-indicator texts. And I will, in a little while, I will show you an example of that just for you to understand what we're talking about. So please, if you are doing assessments from now on, please make sure to use the file that is labeled April 2025 to have all these clarifications included. Of course, if we make updates to the methodology in the future, it may change to, December 25 or May 26 or something like that. But currently, the latest updated version of the methodology and of the templates is labeled April 2025. So make sure that you're using this. I will get back to which assessments are affected by that, but April 2025 is the most recently updated version. So for one particular sub-indicator, we have scoped the subject matter a little bit. I will also detail this a bit more, but this has to do with sub-indicator 3B, assessment criteria B, where we have made a specific limitation to trade agreements. Again, in a little while, I will come back to this. And then we have added some specific instructions regarding the use of MAPS main at the level of sector and entity. So this is mostly regarding criteria that are not applicable if you apply them at the entity level. So now we have specifically written in the methodology, if you apply this methodology at the level of an entity, for example, all of these following criteria should be marked as not applicable. So this is now included in the methodology. Regarding the clarifications we have made, this is just an example from the very first sub-indicator of the methodology. As you can see here, I have marked what has changed in track changes. And as you can see, we are really talking about clarifications. So a large number of these clarifications have to do with exchanging words such as here, where you can see previously it was are, now it's must be, to make very clear that it's a must and not something that could be the case. So we have removed a lot of shoulds and replaced them with must be, just to underline without any doubt that what this criteria is evaluating is whether or not this is in place. So this is the type of corrections and clarifications we're talking about. It is words that were maybe unclear as to whether it was must or could, and similar types of words that can have some ambiguity within them. We have revised so that it is now clear what is being assessed, and this is done throughout the methodology, but we are remaining at this relatively minor level. So this means that we have not changed what is being assessed in any of the sub-indicators, except for sub-indicator 3BB, which I was talking about before, deals with international agreements. So we have limited the scope of this to being trade agreements. And the reason for this is that we were told by assessors and other people working on assessments that when you are looking in a country or at a subnational level or wherever, there are so many potential international agreements that might potentially conceivably have an impact on public procurement. And it is almost impossible within the scope of an assessment to trawl through all of this to make sure that you have covered every possible angle. And for this reason, we have limited it to trade agreement, which is where there is most likely to be provisions that will affect public procurement. It is important to say that this limitation is a sort of minimum limitation in the sense that if in the country at hand, assessors and involved parties deem it relevant to include requirements from other international agreements that are not trade agreements, it is perfectly permissible to do so. It is just that the requirement is to look at trade agreements. If you, in the context of that you're assessing, want to look at more, that is okay, but the requirement is now for trade agreements only. So that concludes the changes that we have done to the methodologies itself. And as you can see, what we are talking about is relatively minor tweaks. We are now moving on to the user guide. So the user guide has been rewritten and created as a standalone document. Previously, it was sort of embedded in MAPS main, but now we have made it into an independent document, which also underlines the fact that the user guide applies to all elements of the framework, so both MAPS main and the modules. There were some parts of the user guide that were maybe a little bit ambiguous as to whether the element was considered mandatory or not. And we have in this new user guide underlined that a stakeholder mapping is a must-have to do when you are doing the context analysis for the assessment you're doing. And of course, in the MAPS main and in each of the 4 supplementary modules, there are listed the requirements for the context analysis if you do an assessment with that particular module. And in each of those context analysis requirements, we have guidelines and specific requirements for this stakeholder mapping. And in fact, they are the same across MAPS main and the 4 modules. So just to say that a stakeholder mapping, which was very often done anyway as part of assessments, it has now been made clear that this is mandatory as part of the context analysis. And as always, of course, the purpose of this is that the stakeholder mapping is taken into account when the assessment is done. So all the gap analysis and the recommendations and the strategic action plans should take into account stakeholder analysis, i.e. who is supposed to be carrying out the changes that are envisioned. And this is a good segue into the second change, which is that a strategic action plan, which was part of the previous framework, it has now been made clear that this is a mandatory part to develop as part of the assessment report. The requirements of for this strategic action plan is detailed in the user guide and the report template. And it's important to say that this strategic action plan is mandatory. We are aware, of course, that when assessments are done, they are done in collaboration with the authorities of the assessed jurisdiction. And it's useful to bear in mind that this strategic action plan is the proposed outcome of an assessment. It is not a binding document in the sense of the level of detail and so on that would be required from policy initiatives. Of course, once an assessment is published, it is the property of the government in question, and it is their prerogative to carry forward any suggestions that are made in the strategic action plan. But the action plan is a mandatory part of the assessment. So you could say that it is the assessment's advice for the government in question. The assessment team is saying, based on all the findings we have made in this assessment and the recommendations that we have made as a result of those findings, we propose the following strategic action plan to be carried out. And it is then the responsibility of the government in partnership with international partners as appropriate to move forward with that action plan. Finally, it has now been made clear that it is mandatory that non-government stakeholders, which is to say civil society organizations and private sector representatives, are included in the assessment steering committee. Now, if this is for some reason completely impossible, reasons must be given in the assessment report. And as always with things like that, assessors must sort of take that into consideration when they do the assessment as well. So what kind of structural situation is it that makes it impossible to include these non-government stakeholders? So it is not possible to not include these stakeholders because it is inconvenient or something like that. But we do realize, of course, that there might be countries, for example, where such organizations are not active at all or are not active on public procurement matters, or that those organizations refuse themselves to participate in such an exercise. And in those cases, assessors must give those detailed explanations in the assessment report. So those at a very high level are the changes to the user guide. When you look at the new user guide, you will also see that we have revised the visual representation so that it now follows better the stages of an assessment. And of course, I invite you all to go and take a look at this new and improved guide. Moving on to the analytical approach, what we have changed here has to do with the gap analysis and quantitative indicators. First, the gap analysis. So if any of you have done a MAPS assessment or have read an assessment report, you will know that before we had what you might say was two classification systems for gaps. First, assessors had to identify whether there was a gap and whether, if there was a gap, this gap was substantive or minor. And then subsequently, for all substantive gaps, assessors had to determine the risk classification for those gaps. So we have streamlined this now, and so that we only have a single classification, which means that the distinction between minor and substantive gaps has been discontinued. So the updated gap analysis is, as you can see here in the slide, assessors must decide whether there is a gap or there is no gap. If there is a gap, then a risk classification must be made, either low, medium, or high risk. For high risk gaps, only red flags can be considered. And then finally, regardless of risk classification, for all gaps, recommendations must be made to address them. So as you can see here, this is a considerably lighter gap analysis because we have gotten rid of this double classification. It also puts more emphasis on the risk classification. Of course, the risk classification is supposed to be used for the strategic action plan so that the report can be used to advise governments on what to prioritize when they seek to improve the system after the assessment. And this new updated gap analysis supports that. It also makes the reports somewhat leaner because we don't have to any longer have this distinction between substantive and minor gaps. So just to recap, either an assessment criteria has a gap or it has no gap. If there is a gap, then the rest of the analysis progresses. For quantitative indicators, the change we have made is very minor. We have removed the distinction between minimum and recommended indicators, which means that now all quantitative indicators are mandatory unless data is not available or feasible to obtain in order to calculate them. The reason we have done this is that the experience from all assessments is that teams always sought to do as many quantitative indicators as they could, and the only limitation on it was really lack of data. So for this reason, we thought there was no reason to have this distinction anymore. Instead, we would just say that these are the indicators that are available and should be used unless they can't for some reason. As has always been the case, if a quantitative indicator cannot be calculated for lack of data, then this must be explained. So this is unchanged and now applies to all quantitative indicators. Finally, for the analytical approach, we have made clear situations where there is non-applicable criteria. So what we have seen previously in assessments is that to some extent, from time to time, we would see assessors mark criteria as not applicable if the topic that was dealt with in the criteria was not existing in the country. And for some sub-indicators, this is correct, but for others, it is not. And we have now made this explicit so that a number of sub-indicators are non-applicable if the situation in an assessed jurisdiction is in a particular way. And this is now explicitly mentioned for those sub-indicators and assessment criteria. For example, for sub-indicator 3B, both criteria, this was the sub-indicator I talked about before with international trade agreement, if the assessed jurisdiction has not signed any trade agreements, international trade agreements, then these criteria are not applicable. Conversely, for sub-indicator 3A, we have the situation that criterion A asks if a country has a sustainable public procurement strategy policy in place, and criterion B asks if the SPP implementation plan has certain characteristics. So if A is a gap, i.e. if the country does not have such a plan, B is also a gap. It is not non-applicable. This is just an example. Again, all the sub-indicators that have non-applicable criteria are now explicitly marked in the methodology, and you can see a list of all of them in the release notes. You can also in the release notes see a list of those, what you might say, gray zone criteria, where there could be doubt about whether the applicability, but which are in fact applicable. So all of this is explicit in the release notes, and all non-applicable criteria are made explicit in the methodology. Furthermore, the the indicator matrix has now an option to choose for the conclusion of criteria that is not applicable, but only for those criteria where this is possible. So there should now be no doubt about which criteria can be marked as not applicable. For the templates, what we have done is, of course, to carry over all the changes that have been made and that I have presented so far. So, for example, the gap classification and so on, all of this has been carried over into the templates. Furthermore, what we have done is that we have tweaked the structure slightly of the report template. So for each indicator now in the updated template, there is a single session provided for a synthesis of the assessment of that indicator. And this is where assessors can now include both strengths, weaknesses, and recommendations in a synthesized manner. So rather than mechanically going through each sub-indicator, now the assessment report is supposed to have a synthesis of the entire indicator, saying that taking into consideration all findings here, what we see is the following. This means that we will have less repetition in the assessment report, and it will also mean that the assessment reports will be less burdensome to draft and review, which should provide us with a swifter turnaround time for reports. Of course, we still have all those granular details in the indicator matrix. So each and every assessment criterion is described in the indicator matrix, but at the level of the report, we will now have a much more synthesized approach. This is reflected also in the guidance comments that you will find in the report template, which stresses this synthetic approach to the report writing. So this is a streamlining of the report template to ensure that we have assessments that take into consideration across findings, but also something that is quicker to draft, review, and also in the end to read. So finally, I want to just say a little bit about who is affected by these changes. So we launched them a couple of weeks ago on May 16th. And the affected assessments are any new assessments that start after that date. So this means assessments where the concept note is approved after May 16th, 2025, must comply with these changes, use the updated templates, and so forth. Assessments that are already ongoing, they are not required to comply with this. And they are not required to use the updated templates. So if you are working on an assessment that has already started, i.e. where the concept note has already been approved, and you are already in the middle of drafting using the old templates, you are perfectly allowed to continue to do so. If you want to use the updated templates, you're free to do so, but it is not a requirement. If you're working on specific assessments and you have any doubts about this, we invite you, of course, to reach out to your lead institution, and we will be happy to help and to be in a dialogue. But just to repeat, if you are currently engaged in an assessment where the concept note is already approved, then it is not a requirement that you use the new templates. So you don't need to transpose anything made in old templates into the new templates if you are working on an assessment that is already ongoing. If you are starting an assessment this year after May 16th, you are required to use the new templates. And for any doubts, do get in touch and we will be able to sort it out. So with that, I have concluded my run-through of the changes that we have made in this update. And I see that Nicholas has taken care of some questions that were popping into the Q&A while I was talking. But we wanted to also have a dedicated time for you to ask further questions in the Q&A function if you have any. So please go ahead. And Nicholas, of course, now I have not seen the questions, so if there are any sort of shared points from those questions that you would like to just summarize, feel free to do so.
Sure. Thank you, Jeppe, and thank you also for the good work of preparing all of this that took several months in the making. Also, I'm glad to see several of the people who helped us in this process, who gave us their input on how to improve and how to make the assessments more easier to produce and also easier to review. So while we wait, in case there are any more questions, I would like just to sort of for those of you who might have not yet seen what I typed there, I want to group some of the questions that were received. So some of them are related to languages, and I just wanted to reiterate one of the key elements that we have at the Secretariat is that we work and we produce everything in 3 languages: English, Spanish, and French. And that is also related to the languages that the technical advisory group can work on. So of course, an assessment can be done in any other language, but for that, the idea would be to use the English version of the methodology. Also to mention that English is our main working language. So documents are first released in English and then translated to other languages. So that's why you might see sometimes, and we are grateful for you who help us sometimes identify a typo or some wrong word used in a translation. So any assessment that is done in any other language, please refer to the documents in English. And also at the end, if you write something in another language, make sure that when you submit the report, it is submitted in English as the main language and as the language that we can easier interact with different stakeholders in the country and also of the technical advisory group. All of these documents that we are referring to today are available on the website. Also, just a note of that. So you might have seen that our website is new. So both for the documents and for the website, bear with us and please help us identify if you see anything that is not working. It might be that there's a slight glitch as we are working with this new site. So we are striving, as someone pointed out, that there was something that wasn't available, to put it online immediately and to improve the site with your comments. But of course, everything again is available in English, French, and Spanish. All of these documents, as Jeppe said, have been incorporated in all our suite of tools and of documentation. So that means that we checked the guides, we checked the templates, but also we went and checked the e-learning program, for example. So the e-learning program is now aligned with all of these changes. And very importantly is that we are not expecting assessors to go and take the test again. What we are expecting, and that is like a commitment that certified assessors take, is to continue their process of continually engaging with MAPS. So I'm glad to see many of them here today connected, but also to make sure that they are using the correct templates, that they are using the updated guidance. And with that, we don't see, especially because it's as Jeppe was mentioning, it's not that it's a complete change of the methodology. It's just tweaking things to make it better. We don't see that there's a change for you to recertify. I think kind of on the big topics, I would say that is what I saw. Of course, you for any question can be right now, and we will solve it. But also remember that we are available for you during assessments, or before assessments or at any point on solving general questions about maps. Of course, the role of the secretary would not be to identify whether something is a gap or not in a certain situation. That's up to the assessors. But on the general use of the methodology, on the general use of the templates, be it today or afterwards, feel free to reach out to us and to also provide us with input on how to further improve.
Thank you, Nicholas. We just had one last question on the general, and you mentioned this already on the e-learning and certification. And as you said, the e-learning has been updated to reflect all of the changes that we have presented here today. This also includes the certification exam. And as always, the full e-learning program, so MAPS Fundamentals and MAPS for Assessors, is freely available, open to anyone, and completely self-paced. You can access it via this QR code. It will take you to our new webpage where all information on the e-learning program is available. Also, all information on the certification exam, which is available on application only. Just a reminder that the MAPS certification exam and the MAPS certification is relevant for people who are looking to be lead assessors on MAPS assessments, where since July 1st last year, it is now mandatory that all lead assessors have obtained this certification. But the training itself, the e-learning itself, is open to anyone and completely self-paced, and now also updated with these latest changes. So please do go to our website and check this out. You will find more information there, including information on the upcoming cohort dates for the certification exam. And as Nicholas said, all the documents that I've been talking about today is available on our new website. It's the same URL as always, but you can also find it via this QR code. This will take you directly to the methodology page, where you will find all the updated documents. So the methodology documents, the user guide, the templates. You will also find the release notes that I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, and the infographic that gives a quick overview of the changes that have been made. I want to just say, give you a final promotion for something that we have upcoming. So in the meantime, if anyone has any more questions, please submit them in writing through the Q&A. So if there are some people who have still raised hands, do pop your question into the Q&A, and I think we can still manage to answer it. Otherwise, as Nicholas said, we are of course always available on our usual channels. But otherwise, finally, we just want to say that the MAPS Secretariat is very happy to, in partnership with the OECD, be organizing the Global Public Procurement Forum this year in July. It will be a big in-person event at the OECD headquarters in Paris, where we will bring together policymakers, experts, business leaders, civil society, academia, and practitioners, and so on, for 2 days dedicated to public procurement. So this is a big event that goes beyond the technical events that are sometimes organized for public procurement. And we hope to bring together a variety of stakeholders to discuss the untapped 13%, which is to say public procurement. We hope to see many of you in person. Please follow the QR code if you want to register. It is also possible to register for virtual attendance. So if you cannot make it to Paris, you may do so, and we hope to see as many of you as possible. And while I was giving this little promotion, we got one final question in the Q&A, and I think maybe, Nicholas, you can you can also provide some details on this, which has to do with the links between MAPS and the OECD.
Sure. So on that, I found that if I understand correctly, two points there is on MAPS and relationship with certain countries. So we've engaged, and this is part of what we do of promoting MAPS across the world. So both and we do that often, and many thanks to the particularly to the MDBs and to international organizations who link us up with government authorities. So we present MAPS in several fora, mostly in regional and global events, but also in virtual events with specific countries, including, I understand, MAPS to PRC, I understand China, if that's the question. So, and we have, of course, done that, and also the World Bank has carried out assessments using indicators from MAPS in countries. Second point of the linkage between MAPS and OECD. So the MAPS Secretariat is hosted at the OECD in the Public Governance Directorate. And we, of course, collaborate closely with the public procurement team at the OECD, in particular for organizing this event that Jeppe was speaking about, the Public Procurement Forum. And the OECD itself carries out assessment as many other of the international organizations here present, the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and other regional banks. So for that, what we do is we, of course, the relationship is very formal, and there's a clear distinction, an independent distinction between us as a hosted entity and the persons working at the OECD who carry out assessments, because the Secretariat and the Technical Advisory Group, we carry out the assessment, the quality assurance process for those assessments, regardless of who carries them out, an institution or a country, and that includes also the OECD. So those are the main linkages with the OECD, and of course as hosts of the MAPS Secretariat.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. And with that, I think we will close for today. Once again, thank you all very much for joining us for this webinar. We hope, of course, that the changes that we have presented will be useful for all of you who are involved in assessments, whether as assessors or international partners or country authorities. The purpose of the changes is to make the framework better and easier to use for all of you. Do go to our website and check out all the new documents. And as said previously, this webinar has been recorded, so we will be sharing the recording as well on our website after the webinar. So please do share it amongst your networks so that we can make sure that these changes and the news of them, they reached all corners of the MAPS world. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a very good rest of your day, a good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you and goodbye for now.